with us, and he's going to be talking about the changes that Apple is forcing, if I may say so, forcing some of these other developers like Dropbox, what they have to, if they want to work with Apple, what they have to do. So I'm just going to turn it right over to Adam, and he can go right into it. So Adam, it's all yours.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much. Once you're done with screen sharing, I think I can take over from my
Should
keynote.
be done, right?
Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yep.
Yep, got it now. Okay. All right. So let's first of all talk about something called file provider. So I did an article about this and a few weeks ago, and it was honestly one of the harder articles I'd written in a long time. I sort of started off thinking, oh, there's this new thing and stuff's changed. I should just talk about that. And as I got into it and saw like all the little weird details, I just kept writing and rewriting and writing. It took me days. So what we're getting at here is the cloud storage services. So I know probably most of us use Dropbox. Dropbox is kind of the big one for the consumer space. But, there are, three others that are very commonly used, Box, Google Drive, and Microsoft OneDrive. And then there's actually quite a few more that are just, available, but we don't hear about them quite as much. And for those who aren't maybe super familiar, these cloud storage services are primarily aimed for most people at like syncing your files between your devices. So you can get the same thing if you have a MacBook and an iMac. You can get to them on your iPhone, your iPad, and that's great. They also provide collaboration capabilities, so you can share a folder with someone else, and then that person can make changes to the files in that folder as well. And that's kind of where I've been focused most of my usage over the years, but I also do certainly a lot of syncing between my devices as well. Now, you might wonder about where iCloud Drive fits into this. iCloud Drive is very much the same kind of thing, particularly now. Apple's been enhancing it over the years, and it does provide the same sort of syncing of files and folders between your devices and between, and sharing them with others. However, I'm not going to really discuss it again because although it works in much the same way as the others, it's not, Apple is special casing it. So as you know, iCloud shows up in your Finder Windows sidebars separately, and it's not really lumped in quite the same way with all the rest of these. So, and also iCloud Drive, honestly, while it's had some changes, it's been different from the beginning. So it's not quite as unusual as what the changes that's been happening with Big Four is. So, all right, let's talk about file provider. What is file provider? Now, it's an API, it's an extension, blah, 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 developer stuff. But what it basically is Apple sitting here looking at all of these cloud storage services and saying, this is a mess. We need a way to get all of the cloud storage services interacting with macOS in the same way, so it's easier for users. And so here's my second bullet point. We can get rid of custom kernel extensions. So one of the things that Apple announced a couple of years ago is kernel extensions from third parties will become a thing of the past. And Apple's very good about announcing this stuff years in advance because they don't want to take developers by surprise. But the cloud storage services all used their custom kernel extensions. The kernel extensions are ways of changing how macOS operates at a very low level. And the problem is they're both a reliability and security nightmare. And because Apple can't control them as much as they would other things, and yet they can work at a very low level in the operating system. So Apple's like, okay, we're getting rid of these things, and developers, you need to get on board with this. And to be fair, the developers for the most part have. So this is when Apple provides some kind of extension like this, it becomes easy for the developers to take advantage of it, but they do have to change everything they've done in the past. So they have to go from this custom kernel extension that did things like maybe it made the cloud storage look like a volume, like a disk on your desktop. Maybe it put custom icons in the Finder to indicate whether or not things were online or offline. Various different things, and certainly just whenever you save a file, something had to tell the cloud storage service, "Hey, this file has changed. It's something you manage. Upload the changes to the cloud, and then and then download to all the other devices." So this is something that the file that the cloud storage services have been working on for about a year, and honestly, Dropbox is the laggard here. Box, Google Drive, and Microsoft OneDrive have all transitioned everyone pretty much, and did so a while ago. It wasn't instantaneous, but at some point, people of those services would get a dialogue saying, "Hey, you need to upgrade, go do this," and they would probably tell you a little about it. But of course, you'd be in the middle of doing something else. You're like, "Well, upgrade, I'm trying to get my work done here." And so you'd click through and blah, 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 not pay attention to what they were telling you. You'd sort of think, it's just going to keep working. And for the most part, it does keep working, except for some little gotchas that some people have experienced. Now, Dropbox is, again, the laggard here. They've had a beta for over a year, and it's now out of beta. It's starting to come into, starting to get into the more regular users who don't sign up for the beta. But even then, Dropbox is migrating the user base slowly, probably partly to just keep track of keep their support under control. Like if this does cause people to write in for help, they want to reduce that and spread it out over time. Plus, they can make changes as they see problems cropping up, fix them so other people won't run into them. So, but I've even seen people saying, "Hey, I got a notice to upgrade Dropbox on one of my Macs, but not on another one." So it's still Dropbox is the one where it's really kind of tricky. Okay, so what's different? There are two key changes. Now, the big one is that Apple has decreed that all files must live in your home folder, inside the library folder in your home folder, in a folder called Cloud Storage. And you can see here, this is my screenshot from my Mac. I've got a folder for Dropbox, folder for Google Drive. Those are the ones I use. I have a OneDrive, but I don't use it. Mine don't use Box at all. But everything will be here. And this is an important change because in the past, you could, by default, the services would usually put your files just loose in your home folder. So you'd have in your home folder, you'd have a Dropbox folder, you'd have a Google Drive folder, you'd have a OneDrive folder. And you could usually change the location of that. So if you didn't want it in the home folder, you could move it somewhere else. I won't say it's no longer possible, but it's no longer possible to have the files actually live in your home folder. They must be in library cloud storage. So fact number one to keep in mind. Fact number two to keep in mind, and this is not actually hugely different, but it's now consistent across all of them. So every one of these services has had the opportunity to gives the user the opportunity to keep some files locally and to have others exist only online. Now, this actually didn't start that way. In the early days of Dropbox, and Dropbox gets big credit for coming up with all this stuff. In the early days of Dropbox, you had a Dropbox folder on your Mac, and its entire contents were synced up to the Dropbox cloud and synced down to all the other devices. That's it. At some point, Dropbox says, well, this is silly. You could really want to have more on your in your Dropbox account than you have room for on your Mac. Maybe you've got a 256 gigabyte SSD and you just don't have it much free space, but you don't need much of it at one time. And so Dropbox provided the option initially of doing like selective sync, where you can pick which folders would actually sync, things like that. And so over time, all of the providers, all the cloud storage providers have gone to this basic mode of, some files can be local and some files can be remote. Now, the terminology that seems to be settling in is offline or pinned. Those are the ones which actually exist on your computer. However, and then the other term that we were for remote files is online only, because of course they always exist online. It's just, do they also exist on your computer? And you can see here in this screenshot, some of these files have little cloud icons next to them and some don't. If they have a little cloud icon, as you can see the icon with the little down pointing arrow, that means if you click that, it will download from the cloud. So these are online only files, whereas the ones with no indication there are offline files. So, okay, two big things to keep in mind. Now, when you, along with clicking that little cloud icon, which honestly isn't terribly intuitive because it's not a thing you would think of, the way you would mostly manage what happens in your whether files are online or online only or offline is you would control click them and you would choose some commands. So this left-hand screenshot is Dropbox, and you'll see down in the quick actions area, we've got make available offline and make online only. So you can toggle the status of those files with these two commands. Google Drive's a little different, and I don't honestly know why they're different. I don't know what Dropbox's problem is, but Google Drive, you can see in the right-hand screenshot, has the same kind of quick options. It has available offline, and that would change, but it also has here a download now command, and that would change to remove download if it was already offline. So you don't have to, you have full control over what happens and whether things are local or remote. Okay, so now those are the two big changes, but here's where we start getting into the impacts. The first impact is that where do you find these things? For most people, Dropbox, Google Drive, Box, OneDrive, they've all appeared in your Finder Windows sidebar. Now, where they were in the sidebar was completely random. I mean, just totally random. They would probably usually show up in favorites, but you could remove them from favorites. You could move them around. It was a bit of a crapshoot. So Apple's like, this is not an Apple way of doing things. Apple likes things to be consistent. So now you will see in the Finder settings, if you go to Finder and choose settings and then look at the sidebar tab, you can see there's a new item down here called cloud storage. And if you select that, all of the cloud storage providers you use, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever, will appear in your Finder sidebar under locations. So they'll appear next to your Mac, your hard disk, your external drives, your CDs, if it has those, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you can turn them off if you don't want them to be there. You're like, it's just clutter, no problem. Turn it off here, they go away. But here's the other interesting fact is you can move them out of locations and put them back into favorites if that's where you prefer. So you can set this up exactly the way it was before if it has changed and you don't like the way it is now. All right, second impact. So remember how I said that as the migration took place, a lot of people just sort of went with it, like, oh, okay, dialogue, some upgrades happening, sure, fine, whatever, let me get back to my work. Well, so that migration was kind of a big deal because what happened is everything, your Dropbox folder, your Google Drive folder, whatever, had to move into /library/cloud storage. And it had to move from wherever it was before. And at least early on, I mean, I sort of hope this has improved over time, but we ran into this with both Google Drive and Dropbox. People are ending up with 2 copies. So you get the proper one in, library/cloud storage, no problem. And that one's syncing and everything like that. But instead of moving it properly, we're seeing situations where it's sort of being copied there instead, and the previous Dropbox folder or Google Drive folder remains in its old location as a duplicate. This is a bad thing. This is really, really terrible, because particularly if those sidebar items that you had and you used in the Finder didn't change, you could be in a situation where you were using a folder to store new files, changed files, that wasn't syncing. Only the one in /library/cloud storage actually syncs. And it's like my wife and I both hit this, separately with Google Drive, and I hit it with Dropbox as well. And so it's something to pay attention to. So, however, making it even more complicated, I'm so sorry about this, all of the services nowadays, if they do the migration correctly, they're putting what's called a symlink, basically a fancy Unix kind of alias, of your folder back where it used to be. So files really exist in library/cloud storage, but they're saying, users expect to find Dropbox in their home folder, so we'll make a symlink to Dropbox in the home folder. That's good, except for the fact that if you ended up with one of these disconnected local folders, that presumably didn't happen, and now you have to figure out whether or not that folder in your home folder is a real folder, which is bad, or if it's a symlink, which is good. And so you can see here this terminal command I've run. This is very simple. You just open terminal, and you type ls -l, and what that says is, show me all this information in ls, a little bit more data than just the file name. And then you can see that I've outlined a couple of these items. So you can see I don't love my downloads folder, and you can see it's got that D over here on the left. That means it is actually a directory. So D equals directory, and that's bad when it comes to Dropbox, but it's good when it's it's just a normal folder. So Dropbox, you can see, here's this Dropbox and this funny arrow pointing to the right, user Atom library. I had to cut it off. You can see the first letter over here is an L. That indicates it's a symlink. And I was playing around, so I did some other stuff. You can see this Dropbox demo alias just has a dash. That's a normal Mac OS alias, which is not the same thing. It is not what you want. And you can see Google Drive that properly symlinked as well with an L here. And then I just showed you library has another D because it's another real folder. So if you have a Dropbox folder here with a D on the left, on the leftmost letter, that's a bad thing, and that means you have a disconnected local folder, and you're going to need to compare what's in it against what's in your main Dropbox folder. And if there's any discrepancies, you'll have to move files from the disconnected one into the remote one, and then eventually remove that old Dropbox folder. So this is, I said this was tough to write about because I just can't tell what's going to have happened on your machine. It's no guarantees one way or the other, but I know the disconnected local folders happen. So that's something that you want to be careful of.
Adam, can I ask a question on that
Certainly.
last slide?
Mm-hmm.
So what should we look for first? Should we go to the Finder to make sure that cloud storage option is there in locations before we even update the Dropbox or the other services?
No, there's no need to do that. That's a good question. So during the migration, library/cloud storage, library/cloud storage, shouldn't say this. I don't know if it exists until you try to use Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that. But that will be created, no question. Like there's no option that's not going to happen.
It's
Yeah.
auto-created when you start any of those file services.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yes and no. So I have not updated my Dropbox account
Right.
to this because I've been waiting to talk to somebody. And I emailed you a while
Yes.
back because it's like, what do I do? But all right, so I do have Dropbox running. I have not updated it, but I do have that cloud storage option in locations already. So
Yes,
that's why
because
I asked. Yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
So that the in locations and the Finder preferences there, Finder settings there, that is merely macOS interface. So in
Okay.
other words, Apple, it's sort of like you don't necessarily have a CD drive attached to your computer, but there's an option for CDs there too.
Correct. Okay.
So that's just interface. And so whether or not, library/cloud storage actually exists right now doesn't really matter. When you upgrade Dropbox to the new version, it will be created.
Okay. My next question is, all right, I have 2, even 3 laptops that are on Dropbox right now. What do I do? Because I can't update them all simultaneously. Should I turn Dropbox off on 2 of the laptops that are not my main laptop, do my main laptop first and then update it on the others? How do my others see this new setup without me duplicating all these folders?
Another excellent question, and luckily the answer is you don't need to do anything special. And the reason for that is that what you're doing here is, in some ways, kind of hate to say this, you're just shuffling things around locally.
Mm-hmm.
So you're installing a new version of Dropbox that knows to look in library/cloud storage, /library cloud. So I'm abbreviating. But the connection to the Dropbox cloud, which is the truth is in the cloud, that remains static. Now, Dropbox doesn't have to, when the migration, Dropbox doesn't have to like re-download and re-upload everything. It's just moving these files around on your Mac. And so even if you upgrade one of your Macs and not another one, it won't matter. It'll just keep working and it won't be a problem. And the reason is because each computer is talking to the Dropbox cloud separately. And the actual location of the files on each computer is sort of irrelevant.
Okay.
So
you say,
in other words,
okay.
it's good. They've done it right, actually.
I know, but you say that, but by the libraries on your computers are typically separate entities. I have a M2, I have a M1, I have an Intel, and the library folders are normally separate entities. And I have one on an Intel that is only in Monterey. So I can see where the 2 Ventura laptops may talk to one another and it'd be okay. But are you saying that my Intel one will still work even though
it will? It
okay.
will. And the reason is, again, it's sort of this can be tricky to conceptualize, but each computer talks to the Dropbox cloud independently.
Okay.
They actually don't talk to each other at all. And so there's no communication between Dropbox on your M2 and your M1 or your Intel Mac. And so as a result, you can even that's why you can even have different versions of the Dropbox software on each one. And assuming they're still new enough to actually talk to the cloud appropriately, there'll be no problems. So I think, I understand the concern and you're totally right to be cautious, but in this case, that's not something you have to worry about.
Okay, I'll be calling you.
I'm so on the hook here.
All right, go ahead.
No worries. Okay. So, all right. So we talked about that. So there's a sort of a corollary to these disconnected local folders breaking. And again, I hope this doesn't happen. It shouldn't happen now. I know that it did in the past, so I'm making sure to warn you about it just in case, because I don't know the circumstances under which it might happen. Some apps store support files in Dropbox, say. For instance, BB Edit, Keyboard Maestro are the two big ones I use. And basically what they're saying, what these developers have said is like, oh, this is a good way to sync our macros, our settings files, our filters, things like that you might want on multiple machines. This is a way to sync them for users to sync them between multiple machines. And so as a result, I'm just kind of raising this as a topic because let's say you use Keyboard Maestro, which uses Dropbox to sync on multiple machines, and you make a change on one of your Macs. And if you've got this disconnected local folder problem, or if something's gotten confused such that Keyboard Maestro doesn't know where Dropbox is anymore, suddenly those changes won't sync. And so all I'm doing is kind of putting it in your head, I might have to go look in Dropbox, see if there's any apps that seem to be using it. They'll have a folder, like the way it works in Dropbox for Keyboard Maestro and BB Edit is they create an application support folder at the top level of Dropbox, and then they have a folder inside that. So just go poke around. If you see anything that looks like it's using it, make sure it's syncing properly. So nothing much to do there. Just pay a little bit of attention, and if something stops working, that I've got this little neuron firing in your head, like, oh, maybe it's because Dropbox. So any event, not a big one, but just something to pay attention to. Here's the big one. So this may or may not be a problem for people here, but it certainly is a big problem for a lot of Dropbox users in particular. Remember how I said in the days before File Provider that the cloud storage services let you specify where you wanted your folder to live? So people would put Dropbox folders on an external drive because they said, well, heck, I've got my iMac sitting here. I've got a 4 terabyte drive attached to it. I want my Dropbox, my 2 terabyte Dropbox, because I got a big Dropbox account. I want it all syncing to that big drive. And that always used to be possible, and for all of them. However, there's a real problem with File Provider from this perspective, which is that if everything is in tilde/library/cloud storage, that inherently means that it's on your internal boot drive. So if you have a small internal boot drive, you got problems. You cannot put everything locally if you are using Box, Dropbox, or Google Drive. I heard an exclamation of dismay. I'm so sorry. So Dropbox, I put this little screenshot in here. This is more than 3 weeks ago now, but it's about 6 weeks ago. And there's this huge thread in the Dropbox support forums of people basically banging hard on Dropbox, saying this is a huge problem for us. We pay Dropbox thousands of dollars a month because we have terabytes and terabytes of storage in Dropbox, and we need access to an external drive for storing this locally. And so you can see this community manager with the wonderful name of KZDBX, love that, basically says, yeah, we get it. This is a problem, and we're working on it. So the useful thing that came out of people banging on Dropbox about this was they did say customers who have their Dropbox folder on an external drive will not be migrated to the updated macOS experience to File Provider. So that's one of the reasons why some people are not being upgraded to the latest version for Dropbox right now, because they use this external drive support. So I haven't heard any more from Dropbox on this, but I'm sure that they are working hard on it because it is a big deal. And sort of worse, it's the biggest deal. It's the biggest deal for Dropbox's most valuable customers, frankly, because they're paying Dropbox a lot of money for a lot of storage. And so they're working on it. I have not seen any statements from Box or Google Drive about dealing with it. However, Microsoft OneDrive has solved the problem. And they did it in kind of a clever way. I just sort of behind the scenes, just saying what they did is they separated the sync root from the cache. And basically what that means is the sync root still lives in, ~library/cloud storage like it has to, but then Microsoft OneDrive now has this sort of extra cache of where it stores files locally for increased performance, and that can be pushed off to an external drive. Now, there is one workaround for Dropbox, but a lot of people aren't going to like it. There's a client, a special separate third-party client called Mistral. And if you Google on it, you'll find it, slightly funny spelling. And it uses Dropbox's public API. So Dropbox says, hey, if anyone wants to talk to Dropbox, here's the programming interface to do that. And so Mistral uses that API, and it will let you put your Dropbox folder anywhere you want, which is good. So you can indeed, upgrade to if you're upgrading this new version of Dropbox and you want to relocate your Dropbox folder, you could use Mistral and that will let you do it. The gotcha is that the public API for Dropbox does not allow differential syncing. And the kind of people who are most interested in external drive support say you work in a group or you're trying to do video editing. And so you've got this huge Dropbox folder that contains a lot of video source files. With Dropbox, because it does this differential syncing, if you edit a file, say it's a 500 megabyte file, and you make a 1 kilobyte change, a tiny little change, Dropbox will only upload that 1 kilobyte change to the cloud, and then that 1 kilobyte change comes back down to all the other Dropbox shared folders. So that's really efficient. However, without differential syncing, if you're using Mistral, you make a 1 kilobyte change, and Mistral has to upload 500 megabytes to Dropbox, and the others can probably I take it back. Then 500 megabytes will have to come down. Basically, Mistral is fabulous and a wonderful thing, and I recommend it. You can checking it out if you might need it, but be aware that you might have performance issues if you're trying to use it with very large files, which Dropbox might not have been the case there. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute about another option for people who fall into this category, kind of the big data users. But before we get to that, there's another potential change, and it's something that again, it varies from service to service, and it's not really a problem, but it's something you need to be aware of. So let's say you have your Dropbox folder and you drag a file from your Dropbox folder to the desktop. On the Mac, that moves the file. Now, the file then no longer exists in Dropbox, but from Dropbox's perspective, that is the same thing as deleting the file. It's no longer in Dropbox. It doesn't exist in the hierarchy that Dropbox manages. And so Dropbox, you'll see, we'll put up something here saying, remove blah 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 one other item from Dropbox account and all devices. If you move these items outside, they won't be available in Dropbox or any devices. So it's actually prompting you to make sure you're aware of this. I believe Dropbox was like this for a while, but not always, and certainly some of the others have been different. In the past, some of them have copied it, and that way, if you move something out of Dropbox, if you dragged something out of Dropbox, you'd get a copy on your desktop, and so it didn't have to warn you because it wasn't disappearing from the Dropbox world. As you notice, Google Drive has the same sort of dialogue here. The item will move to your local folder. The Drive copy will move to trash. And they both have do not ask again checkboxes. And basically that's important because once you acknowledge the fact that, yes, I understand that these files are disappearing from the cloud storage view of truth, then you don't have to be prompted every time you move a file in and out. And what's important to remember is that although the file still exists on your Mac, you moved it to the desktop, In the Dropbox world, in the Google Drive world, it's been moved into whatever the online trash is called. I think Dropbox calls it recently deleted. I think Google Drive calls it trash. So it is there, and those, by default, the services all seem to hold on to things for 30 days. So, you know, if something happened on your Mac, if you put the file back into Dropbox, actually, it's a good question. I don't offhand know whether you'll get another copy, if it'll still remain in deleted files, or if it'll sort of move it out of deleted files. I'd have to test that. So again, not a huge change here, but remember that all of these files are on the same volume. Remember, they're all in library cloud storage. So they move, they don't copy. Now, corollary to this is what happens when you trash a file in your Dropbox folder or your Google Drive folder, or your OneDrive folder. Obviously, on the Mac, you would expect it to go to the trash. And in fact, that's what happens with Google Drive. However, we got to be different for some reason. Google Dropbox does something different. Remember how I was talking about how there are two states for the files? They can be offline, such that they exist on your Mac, or they can be online only, such that they exist only kind of as an icon placeholder on your Mac, and you'd have to download them to actually work on them. If you delete an offline file in Dropbox, it moves into the Mac's trash and into the online Dropbox trash, just as you'd expect. However, for reasons I don't understand, if you delete an online only file icon from your Mac, it does not appear in the Mac's trash, but does move into the Dropbox online trash. So again, it tries to warn you about this. You can see my screenshot's a little small here, but it says, you know, are you sure you want to delete the file such and such? File will be deleted immediately. You can't undo the action. That's because on the Mac, it's not going into the trash. It's literally being disappeared. And the only way to get it back is to go to the Dropbox website, where you go to deleted files. And then you can it says you can restore any file deleted in the last 3 days. You'd select the file, and then there's a restore button. You'd be able to click there. So you can see that, again, it's not so much this is really problematic, but you do have to be aware that if you're going to be going and deleting online only files with Dropbox, not with Google Drive, they may not act quite the way you expect, and that's important to keep in mind. Okay, two more things, and that both of these revolve around that offline, online only split again. And I think you're starting to get the picture here. When a file is online only, it really doesn't exist on your Mac. There's an icon there, but there's nothing in it. It's I don't think it's 0 bytes, but it's like 43 bytes or something like that. So it's really, really tiny. What that means is you can't search it with Spotlight for the content inside it, because it's not there. Like, there's no content from Spotlight's perspective. So as a result, you will be able to search on file names, in theory anyway. I personally believe there's some funkiness going on there, but I haven't been able to really pin it down. If you ever feel that Spotlight is being wonky, there are two really nice little utilities that search, just like kind of brute force search across your Mac's directories. There's one called Easy Find, which is free from Devon Technologies, and one called Find Any File, a shareware app from a guy named Thomas Templeman. And both of those are, like, if you're pretty sure there's a file there, they're going to find it by looking at the file name. They won't be able to search content either, but they can find the file name. So if you're ever worried about that, it's worth doing. So just remember, again, when you do a Spotlight-based search on files in your cloud-based content, it's not going to be able to find anything that's not local, that's not in an offline mode. So, however, there is a nice little tweak that Google Drive has provided to work around this. It has its own search interface. So by default, it's Command Option G. You type Command Option G, and you can just search. You do a search, and then it will find content in all your online only files, as well as your offline files. All right, last one. Same thing. Remember, if a file exists as offline, it exists on your Mac. If it's online only, it doesn't exist, which means you can't back it up. Now, you might think, why do I need to back it up? It exists in the cloud. And two, I mean, it is a fair point that there is another copy in the cloud, but it's really important to back up cloud files that are anyway, because particularly if you share them with other people. So just recently, my wife was working on an extremely important project with a team of collaborators, and the final files folder that had 17 of the things that people have been working on for the last month, and the last copy of those that they were going to be presenting, they were all presentations, disappeared, just went away. And they were using Box, so not Dropbox, but very similar. And it was just gone. Now, my wife could have called everybody and tried to figure out exactly, who had done what. Probably someone deleted it accidentally. Maybe someone's computer freaked out and bad things happened. Who knows? But instead, because she had all the files copied locally, they were all offline for her. Her time machine backups had it. So she was able to, without having to make the rounds of the 5 or 6 people who could be related in this and figure out how to get it back in any other way, shape, or form, which, because it didn't, that was part of it. It didn't seem to be in the box trash, which was perturbing. She just restored it all from her time machine backup, and they got on with their work with 30 minutes of confusion on her part and no one else even noticing. So that's the kind of reason why backups of cloud data are super important, because bad things can happen in the cloud too. Just because they don't usually doesn't mean they can't. And so, if you want to be absolutely 100% certain that you have a backup, you need to make sure that what you do is you bring all your files down to your Mac, make them all offline. You can select all the folders at the top level, control click, say download now, say make files available offline, whatever the command is, and that will bring them all down. Then that Time Machine or Backblaze, as I'm showing here, or whatever, will back them up. And if you later, after you've verified they're all in your backups, then you can evict them. You can make them online only if you want to restore some of that space, if you need some of the space back. The same is actually sort of true of the searching, although I'm not 100% certain how Spotlight deals with evicted files, if it still knows about their content, or if it sees them as having changed. Again, have to delve into that in detail to find out. But Spotlight searches, content searches, are funky enough, and it's hard to pin them down to guaranteed behavior. So if you do this, and I strongly recommend that you do, because I think if you have the space, you really do want a local backup of your cloud files. You need to pay attention in the future to newly shared files. Let's say you're working with someone else, they share a folder with you. If that folder is online only for you, the files in it will probably be online also, and they will not exist in your backups. So you'll want to keep that in mind. You might want to make them offline as well, so they get into your backups, and then you could evict them after they're again in their backups. So that's an important thing to pay attention to. Okay. Now, this is sort of just for the person who was expressing significant dismay about the external drive support in Dropbox, or Google Drive or Box. After I published this article, I actually heard from another company called LucidLink, and they have a very similar cloud storage service where you have data in the cloud, and you can bring it down to your Mac and work on it. But they have a completely different architecture that does not require a file provider system, and does not actually quite work in the same way. So where Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive are all sync and share systems, the truth is in the cloud, but they're always bringing a version down to your computer to work on. So if you have an online only file and you double click it in the Finder, it will download instantly in the background and open in the app as soon as it's downloaded. You won't know, but you're always working on a local file. LucidLink changes things. So it relies on a software called MacFuse. And what MacFuse does is it allows you to make something that looks like a disk on a volume on your desktop, but it goes somewhere else for where the storage actually is. And in this case, it goes to cloud native storage. So your data actually exists on the cloud rather than on an SSD, on a hard drive, on a CD, something like that. Of course, if you're going to be reading all this data over the internet, it does require a fairly fast internet connection. But the claim from people who use it is that it works reasonably well. And it's really aimed at media work groups. So it'll work with any kind of file. There's no question about that. But it's the groups that we're paying Dropbox thousands of dollars a month, and we have 5 terabytes of data of video files that we are all working on. That's the kind of people who are looking at LucidLink. It's more expensive by a bit, not radically so. I mean, it's like, I don't know. If you're paying Dropbox thousands of dollars a month, you're not going to blink at what LucidLink's going to charge. It's going to be the same ballpark of money. But for someone who's paying Dropbox $10 a month, LucidLink will be more expensive. So I don't want to go into it in super detail, but just if you are in that, oh my gosh, I cannot live without external drive support, you should probably look at LucidLink as a way of doing it in a better way. So, okay. That's the nut of it. If you want to read this, because I understand this is a ton of data that I've kind of dropped on you, you can go to this link, tidbits.com, and if you also just search on file provider, you'll find it, or you can go directly to the URL if you capture that. And you can read through the entire long article in even more detail. Because I spent days and days working on this article, trying to figure out exactly what was going on and then explain it in a coherent fashion. So, all right, questions?
Okay. Yes, Jim Cutler, can you please unmute yourself to ask your question?
And let me know if you'd like to drop the slide and go back to video.
Yeah, just an environment I'm running.
Yes, go back to video. I'm sorry, Jim. Yes, Adam, go back to video. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jim.
My situation is I'm running 7 on my beta machines with Ventura, and I'm running 8 on my desktop Intel. And I'm not going to mention which one I like better for an interface. Yeah. But I've been using an external drive on at least one of our desktop machines to back up everything that is in Dropbox. And that means it's an ordinary drive, so it's covered by both my carbon copy cloner and Time Machine. And that's been very successful over a number of years. So of course I really got my knickers in a twist when I first heard about this. And I really appreciate you doing the legwork, because I have not had time to do that. Anyway, and the new thing I got today was a Mistral, and it looks like that would be a good way, at least as part of the backup process, to sync to an external drive. I'm not worried about incremental updating. I'm not. All my big files are atomic. I don't edit them before they go to Dropbox. So that's not a problem, but the first thing that I was concerned about is backup. So is that probably a good solution for providing a backup source?
I think so. I haven't used Mistral significantly, but I hear good things about it. And certainly it should be provided, basically saying, I'm going to put this Dropbox folder wherever I want, and then getting into your backup strategy based on that location. Part of the reason why I've been kind of banging on about the tilde/library/cloud storage location is that to an extent, with both backup and restore, you want to make sure that it will be included. right? If that's your goal, if you want to back up that cloud stuff, which I recommend, make sure that it's included, because it's not somewhere you generally look, right? You know, that you don't go, most people don't go into the library folder. One thing, tip to note for people is if you go to the Finders Go menu, your library folder won't even be listed. Apple hides it by default.
Yes.
And you have to hold down the Option key and click the Go menu to see the library folder. Or if you go into the Finder, the Finder settings or custom view, I can't remember which offhand, you can say always show library folder. And so I always show it because I was like, why wouldn't I want to see it? But there is, that should always be backed up. But, you know, again, it's people don't see it, so they're not going to think about it. And I'm just trying to raise it so you think about it, both by setting a backup so it's not excluded. And when you're restoring, well, if you want to restore something that was in Dropbox, where are you going to go? You're going to go to library/cloud storage.
All right. Jen, got your question answered?
Yeah, I won't.
Okay.
Something to ask you about, to think about, is with the latest rev of Ventura, they broke keeping a home folder on an external drive, which is another trick for having enough space for library.
I mentioned that in the article, as I mentioned in the article, as something that someone who is braver than me should try. So there is an option, and I didn't know it was broken in the latest version of Ventura, but there is an option on in macOS, and has been for years, to relocate your home folder. And again, the big reason to do this is that your internal drive is not very big. You want to move it to an external drive so that you've got room for like all your photos, and you can, I mean, other things you can move to, but you want your whole home folder somewhere else. The reason why I'm I'm hesitant to recommend it, and the reason why I didn't mention the presentation as a good workaround without having because I haven't tested it, is that Dropbox in particular warns against symlinking of its folder, because I mean the obvious answer is, well, I'm just make a symlink of the library /library/cloud storage to my external drive. That should work. But Dropbox has been very unhappy about this in the past, and I would be very hesitant to do that with data that you rely on for that reason. Same with Google Drive, same with Box. I mean, obviously Microsoft has figured out a workaround, so it's probably not impossible. But boy, usually the kind of data you've got in these services, you don't want to risk. And so that's something that I would be hesitant to recommend to someone who was not highly technical and very well backed up.
I appreciate that.
All right.
And I will say I meet those criteria, but it was so a surprise when 13.3 broke it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Edie, can you unmute yourself and ask your question? You muted. Edie or Eddie G?
I'm doing it. There. Okay.
All right. There you go.
So this is a little bit silly probably, but say you backed up your Dropbox by making all the files local, then you make some files online only. Time Machine's not going to continue to back up those online only files, is it?
No, it won't continue to back them up, but they will. Remember, Time Machine keeps, what is it? It's 24 hours, it's hourly for 24 hours, daily for a week, and then, going back. So as long as you get it in there once, you should be okay.
As long as you don't make changes to that file and expect it to be backed up.
But to make changes to it, you have to open it, which downloads it.
Okay.
So the only concern comes, and this is something that I'm not sure. There would have to be some significant testing, and it could change at any time. So I'm not even sure if it'd be reliable over time to know this. Is, let's say you've got 3 Macs, and you do your backups on your iMac, and you've got a MacBook Air and a MacBook Air and a MacBook Pro, and so your iMac is doing all the backups. You download everything there, but then you later evict the file, make it online only. Then you modify it on the MacBook Air. It'll be changed on the MacBook Air and in Dropbox, but because it's online only on the iMac, that change will not get backed up, is my belief.
Okay.
So that's the problem. So that's what I'm saying is like you've got to make sure that you have the files that you're working on are you're working on them on the Mac where you're doing the
Where you're
backups,
backing up.
because right, precisely. It probably is going to work out that way because I mean, in the way most people would end up doing things, I believe, is their desktop Mac where they would do the backups, or they're sort of the main Mac, is probably the Mac that has the most storage and is moving around the least and things like that. So that one's the one that's most likely to be okay to have it. Whereas your MacBook Air, you're more likely to have saved money with a smaller drive and just be pulling down files only when you need to work on them. So my suspicion is it'll work out in most cases, but again, you got to be careful.
Yeah, you should be aware. Okay, I have one more quick question, which I didn't put in the
Please, go
chat.
ahead.
But so does Dropbox create symlinks for your files when it upgrades like that?
So Dropbox will create a symlink for its folder and
For its
just for the
folder.
folder. Right. And so that suddenly in your home folder, you'll find a Dropbox, what looks like a Dropbox folder, but it'll really be a symlink, and everything in it, whenever you open it, you're really opening the one in library/cloud storage. Symlinks, so probably people know how aliases work. An alias is a tiny little file that points to another file or a folder. Symlinks are very similar to that, but they take advantage of, frankly, Unix trickery. It's stuff that's built deep into the guts of Unix, and so the file system just kind of automatically knows that a symlink is really this other thing, and so symlinks are more. They're sort of more reliable and more robust than aliases for this kind of thing.
Okay, so the best practice would be to just let that happen and use those files on your desktop as if. So not go to the library and use those files from there.
Oh, in your home folder. Oh, yeah, you do. So again, you're always working on the stuff in your that's deep in your library, but you don't know that. They're just on your Mac. They'll look when you have the Dropbox symlink. It'll just look like a normal folder, and everything will be normal in it. It will look reasonable. You can access different locations. There are normal files that you can put, normal files and folders that you can put in your sidebar or make aliases to, or whatever you want to do. They're just normal. Just remember that they're really deep in library/cloud storage if you ever need to go beyond just working on them normally.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Edie. Ed Adams, please ask your question.
Hi, Adam. Haven't seen you in a long time out in Santa Barbara, so I wanted to
ages
say
ago.
hi. It goes back over 20 years. I understand. Hey, you kind of answered my question because Time Machine, of course, keeps a overrolling persistent type of backup. While if you're using Backblaze, it's going to keep it there forever. I think a better question I've got right now, and I'm retired, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. When I was Oracle, I had to worry about it all the time, but when you're sitting there and you're looking at multiple people working on the same file, you have the same issue you have when multiple people are writing to the same database as to who has the persistency of who gets the data. In other words, you and I both write, but I wrote over what you wrote before, and now we don't have it. Have they found a solution for that?
Honestly, I don't believe so. I mean, there sort of is no solution, right? Because you have to do record locking at some level is what it comes down to. And so this is actually one of the reasons why I use Google Docs very heavily. With Google Docs and true cloud native document structures, that's not a problem. They're built to handle that, so that you can be changing, I can change one character and you can change it, simultaneously, or we can't do it simultaneously, right? Someone will be off by milliseconds and that person will win. And so whenever I talk to people working in something like Dropbox or Box or Google Drive with standalone Mac files, this is something we came up with when we were, probably with Tidbits originally, but we use it most heavily with Take Control when we were doing the Take Control books, is you have a couple of folders. So let's say you're working on a book. You have the book file, and then you have a checked out folder, and then you have an old folder. So what you do is let's say I'm the author, if I want to work on it, I move it into the checked out folder and I append my initials on the file name, usually a version number. And what that does is it tells anyone else who's looking at Dropbox that the file is checked out and I'm the one who's got it. So that's really, so it gives them the information that they should not mess with it because I've got it. Yeah. And also if I forget to put it back when I'm done, they know who to ask, right? Hey, are you done with that file really? Oh yeah, I'm so sorry I got called away and I'm putting it back now. So the file goes in and checked out, in and out of checked out. And when it's available, it's not in checked out. And but the other thing we always did with Take Control, and I recommend for really important files, is that we would actually make a copy in old. That's why, hence the version numbering. So I'd do like, -1 -ace and -2 -ace, and Tanya would do -3 -tje and things like that. And then we would always keep a copy in old for every version. And it's a little fussy and it's sort of overkill because all these services claim, oh, we retain things for 30 days and versions and blah blah blah. When the file is sufficiently important, I don't trust them. Simple as that. And you don't know, particularly if you're working with a big file where like it could be corrupted. You try writing a book. You have a 200 megabyte file that's in Microsoft Word format. I'm just telling you, you're playing with fire. It's probably will work, but if it doesn't, that file can get corrupted. And yes, you can roll back in various ways online, but I like to have multiple copies at points in time that I can actually kind of touch, honestly. So the combination of checked out and old protects against all of those kinds of problems.
Great. Let me throw one other, and it's not a question. People need to watch out when they're doing these backup schemes and online schemes that they don't have data caps, because if they do, they may get a really big bill from Cox Cable.
Yes, good point.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I have sort of a question, sort of comment, because this, I guess, was my concern, is that things were going to the library. Because now it seems like it's a couple of layers deeper than what it used to be. The library is historically hidden. And like you, I always pulled it out. I couldn't understand why they did that. They don't want people in it, but I need to go in it sometimes. So I want to know, or have you had an experience with, do things now slow down now that they're several layers deeper?
No, okay. No performance changes at all. From the file system perspective, it doesn't matter where something lives in the hierarchy. It can still access it instantly. Okay, great. Keith, you're up next with your question.
Good afternoon, everybody. Got a question about Mega. Have you used Mega? Do you like Mega? How's it doing with the cloud storage idea?
Mega, I have not used Mega. MEGA?
MEGA, it's a New Zealand-based company. I used to use it called Mega Sync. Mega Sync was the app name. Haven't used that in a long time, but I still have a lot of files out on Mega Cloud, and I'm just curious how that's. Apparently, if you're not familiar with it, then
nope,
we don't know.
I had not heard of them. I do see them here now. Let's just do a quick search. Did they use File Provider or not? I'm not seeing anything obvious that way, but it's hard to tell exactly. Oh wait, here we go. Mega. It's a Reddit conversation about them using File Provider. So it's not absolutely. I mean, Apple is not obviously forcing companies to switch to File Provider, but the writing is on the wall, right? So that it's going to happen at some point. But other cloud storage may or may not have switched at this point in time, and you'd have to find some information on their support systems to get to look at that. It was an interesting process. My wife and I were talking about this the other day, that the companies have actually been fairly upfront about this. Like, they haven't been hiding it. And when they do these up migrations, they'll always have a learn more link and whatnot. But it's sort of tough because, again, usually when these things happen, you're not in the like, oh, let me learn about a big new topic mode. You're in the I'm just doing my stuff mode. And if you miss that learn more link when it first popped up, you might have some real trouble finding it again. And so it's I mean, it's kind of an interesting problem on their part of like, how do you make this information that is really important to have? And they're being good about like publishing it, but finding it is not, after the fact, is not always an easy thing. So I think in some ways, having the tidbits article and presentations like this is really helpful, just because it gets the word back into the community such that you all will now know this is true. When people ask you, oh, hey, Dropbox is being weird for me, oh yeah, I remember seeing something about that, and so you're more likely to be able to find the answer.
All right,
Okay,
thank you,
thank
Keith.
you.
Thank you, Keith. David, you're up next with your question, and then Carl, you're after David.
Hi, Adam. God, I haven't seen you in decades. All right, here's my question. I had a bunch of trouble with Dropbox, but it was all cleared up. And where it's left now is my Dropbox folder and information is in user / that's where it is. On the main library, on the main root, I guess, well, whatever. But anyway, I have nothing in Cloud Library. I did at one point, and I found out they were in both places. And I tried to test to see which one synced. And the one that synced was not the one that was in Cloud Library, but the one that was in user. So I deleted the one that was in Cloud Library because it was just taking up space and it's working fine. Do I have a problem?
Oh, so did you by any chance like do the Dropbox beta and then go backwards and then
No,
revert?
didn't do the Dropbox beta.
Okay, I'm surprised by that. Luckily, one of the things that's true of these systems is they're fairly easy to test, right? Because all you have to do is make a new file, give it a funny name. You may have noticed one of mine was called Furfenpoof. Something like I know I could search for and will be able to see really easily. You copy it in there, and then you see if it shows up online.
That's just what I did.
If it shows up online, you're good. You're golden. And as to why you would have gotten that, and you said it was specifically Dropbox. Well, because it wasn't like you would have also had Google Drive that would have created that hierarchy.
No. It was Dropbox. I don't use Dropbox.
Wacky. I mean, I will say, Dropbox seems to have had the most trouble with this whole transition. Box and Google Drive and OneDrive, they kind of took it on the chin. They were like, the transition is happening, deal. And man, people were unhappy. This is about a year ago when it first started, and they took it on the chin hard. But everything seems to have died down since then. Whereas Dropbox is like dripping the pain. So it's possible that Dropbox had a version at some point that like sort of did the migration, and then they're like, "Ooh, that was a bad idea," and they pulled it back. So that's my best guess is that did you say that yours is in the home folder? I was gonna say it's not an external drive, because I wonder if you could have been like caught in the middle of that external drive pullback. So I don't have an explanation for it, but the important thing is you got the data, and if it's on your home folder as real files, then your backups are picking it up. So as long as your backups are picking up, and actually I will say, I know there are people who are like, oh, I don't need to, I can exclude Dropbox from my backups. Don't do that.
No.
Because there's all sorts of good things all sorts of good reasons to hold on to those files, even if they might be duplicated on the cloud as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. We got one more question in here for you. Carl, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, there are many cloud storage services out there. Are you familiar with the service Sync? You haven't mentioned it, and do you know how the changes will affect Sync?
I have heard of Sync, and I'm trying to think. I believe if you read through the comments on that article, I believe that someone was talking about Sync, and I can't quite remember. They were pleased with it, and it may have been that they were letting you stick with your old system with locating your Sync folder wherever you wanted it to be, or giving you the option of upgrading, but they weren't forcing the upgrade. Not 100% certain, but I think that's what it was. If you search through the comments, maybe you'll find it. Unfortunately, sync is a terrible word to search on, but
Yes.
but just read through the comments. People, Tibbetts. So the comments on all Tibbetts articles basically go to Tibbetts Talk, and it's a wonderful community of people. And I strongly recommend reading comments on our articles for additional information and detail.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Frank Salvatini, you're next. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay, thank you. I'm wondering if there are any security issues connected with the Google app. I'm hearing a lot of Google is, taking your data and sending it to places.
So, okay, well, and to be clear, we should talk about, there's more privacy issues. So security is more like keeping your stuff from being stolen, whereas privacy, you're giving it to Google intentionally, it's not being stolen, but, are they using it in some way that you might not approve of? So you can read Google's privacy practices and privacy policies. I don't know exactly what they say with regard to Google Drive, but I would be shocked if they did not basically say, we do not look at this in any way, shape, or form. And the reason is that a lot of Google Drive is business customers who would not in a million years use it if they were concerned about corporate data leaking to Google. It's worth keeping in mind that the reason why Google wants information about us is to better target ads. That's Google's business, is what it comes down to. And so the contents of your documents really not important signals for like, oh, we better give this guy ads about shoes. So pretty much what Google focuses on is web browsing, and if you use Gmail, they'll look at the contents of email for ads sometimes, that kind of. Oh wait, no, they stopped doing that. Take it back. It really comes down to web browsing behavior and tracking you across where you go on the web. Location stuff, you use Google Maps, they might want to be giving you ads because you're in a location, that kind of thing. So, I personally don't worry too much about Google. Google is, a big, powerful company, and they have to be upfront about their business practices. They make their money on ads, but the fact is that it would be horrible for them if it became out that they were reading data of everyone's Google Drive and selling it somehow. Like, that would be disastrous for Google, and so they don't have any reason to do it. They're not making money on that, and there's no reason. It's much more important that they maintain users' trust by not doing ugly things like that. And so that's one side of it. And then the other side, from the security standpoint, I know for a fact that Google has some of the top security team people in the world. You want to look at, you read Apple's release notes about vulnerabilities that are reported to Apple. A vast number of them come from Google. Google is incredibly aware of security and of systems, not just of their own. That's why they're reporting bugs to Apple all the time, because, in some ways, we're all Apple users, but I would guess the vast majority of us are also Google users. So all these companies need to work together to protect security against the actual bad guys, meaning organized crime, meaning, law enforcement from unpleasant countries, things like that.
All right, thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, with that, it is 12:45. It is time to end our presentation. I want to thank you, Adam. I really appreciate you doing this for us. This is good information for me, and I'm sure other people who are here. And could everyone please unmute themselves and thank Adam for his
Adam, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Adam. Great,
Thank
great
you.
presentation.
Thank you, Adam. Really wonderful.
Yeah, this was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank the organizers too for having you.
I was going to say, yeah, it's been wonderful, very well run system. It's been fabulous being here.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week. And thank you all. Dan, okay, I didn't know you were going to show your face. Okay, go ahead. You're muted. Can't hear you.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. No, you're all good. So thank you, Adam, and everyone. Thank you for your support. Next week, we'll be talking about 360 cameras. If you haven't heard about those, I think it's really kind of fascinating. So, yeah, thanks.
I just have to chime in that I actually do. I tested an Insta 360 camera, and they're really cool. But I think the workflow is going to be important because you're kind of faced with this, like, oh my gosh, how do I deal with all this video, and I can pan around myself as I'm moving, and it's a bit of a mind
and
bender.
you might need Dropbox for these files because they're quite large. So yes,
big.
all encompassing, right?
Yes, good. Sounds like it'll be a great talk.
All right, thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.